Uh, we just got the recording grid there. Good. I'm the chairman of the question pool committee that writes the ham exams. And one of the questions we had was about what is DX? And I had to ask Bernie because I had trouble coming up with a definition of what exactly is DX. So Bernie, what is DX anyway?
Okay, Roll, give me the tough one. Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you are, who you are, what band you're on. It's a real question. And mostly my answer is DX is. But in all honesty, it depends on, like I said, where you are. Let's start with that. If you're in Europe, most of the guys there consider DX to be outside of Europe. So if you're in Germany, they really don't consider Italy or France or Spain, whatever. They don't consider that DX. They consider DX outside of their own country. Here in the US, we pretty much think it's anywhere, outside the US. Although some 6-meter guys will say, well, it's not really Canada, but it's anything outside. So it depends on, the situation that you're in as to what DX is. So I think really the answer is DX is, exclamation point. And like Roll said, he's done, he does his classes, and then he gets some really good speakers to talk about what you can do in ham radio. And I just want to plug his efforts that, he gets some of the best guys in the Potomac Valley Radio Club area to do talks on VHF, contesting, propagation, antennas. So I just want to plug what he has done. Go ahead, Roll.
Oh, thank you, Bernie. Okay, so a little history, not too much. DXing's been part of the hobby from the beginning. On day one, it was exciting to work distant stations. The further you could get, the more exciting it was. So eventually, it wasn't long before ham started working each other between different countries, and of course between different states. And so pretty soon they started counting this. How many states have you worked? How many continents have you worked? And pretty soon they were working so many countries that they wondered how many countries could they work. And so this has been something people pursued from the very beginning. And QSL cards initially provided, well, not maybe initially, early on provided the proof. Although I was surprised when I researched this a little bit that there were no QSLs until about 1920, but there was DXing even before that. So both of these aspects are still a big part of DXing. That is talking to people around the world and counting how many, quote, countries you've worked. So in 1937, this guy over here, Clinton B. DeSoto, and I have a little side story on this. I went to Johns Hopkins University and I was an electrical engineer, but we had to take courses in other things, and I took a psychology course. And the guy who was teaching the course, his name was Clinton DeSoto. By the way, this should be DeSoto, not DeSoto. And Clinton B. DeSoto, we went up to him and said, could you be related to the Clinton B. DeSoto of ARRL? And he said, that's my dad. He was into that dumb ham radio stuff. I never understood what he was doing. But he was one of the founders. He said, oh, yeah, I know. He was really into that stuff. I don't get it. Anyway, I was disappointed. I expected some stories. So Clinton wrote this article, and he pointed out how much difficulty he had. He'd been working on it for several years, since maybe 4 or 5 years. He'd been trying to come up with a list. He'd started it many times, how to decide what is a country. And finally, in this article, which is worth digging out on, you can get it at arl.org. The basic rule, he said, is simple and direct. Each discrete geographical or political entity is considered to be a country. And the original list had 231 entries. And if you worked 100 of them, you got an award, looked pretty similar to this, even back then, called DX Century Club. Now, currently, the criteria have changed over the years, and currently there are 5 different parts to the criteria. The definition of a political entity, the definition of geographical entities. Both of these are tricky. And then there's always some exceptions, and 3 is those special areas. And there's a section about areas, excuse me, that are ineligible to be countries. And finally, this first 4 tell you how you can get on. The 5th one tells you how you're taken off the list. So we'll talk about all of these things. And when I say we'll talk about this, Bernie will talk about this. So let's talk about political entities first.
Okay, very good. So before all of the DXCC rules were written down, it was kind of done by the seat of the pants, if you will, by the DXCC desk. The rules didn't really start to form until the 50s. But the first thing that came out was political entities. And what a political entity is, and that's what most civilians would say are a real country. And those are things like states of the United Nations. That means they're a member of the UN. There's approximately 194 UN member states. So they would automatically be put on the list. If they have an assigned ITU prefix, that would also get them on the list, because there are some countries that do not have a UN membership, but they do have a ITU prefix. It should be noted that the ITU prefix block the ITU is a sub part of the United Nations. Another thing is, and this is a more recent one, is having a permanent population and an administration with a local government that is at least 800 kilometers away from its parent. And that's like, if it's what's the word I'm thinking of? If it's on a special list of countries that either the US and or the United Nations think should be a separate country. And we'll go into more of that in a little bit. And then the last one is if they are an IARU member and they are on the State Department independent states of the world list. And there are some instances recently where this is a somewhat new rule and a brought back rule, which this eventually brought on Z6.
I didn't correct that, did I?
So, okay, let's go on to the next screen roll. Okay, so then you've got the geographical entities, and those are the ones that are separated by a certain amount of distance, whether it be on land or if it be like an island or something like that. An example by land is if there is enough land separation, meaning there's a country in between the two possible DXCC entities, for example, like the United States and Alaska, if that distance between the two, the CONUS 48 is 100 kilometers, and then you've got Canada in between. Well, that's where Alaska would come into effect. There are others that are close, but they're not quite enough to make that 100 kilometer spot. I've looked at a few. In fact, when I went to East Timor, there was a place over on the other side of the island that was separated by Indonesia. And I immediately looked to see, well, do we have two new ones here? But we didn't. And another one is Oman and the United Arab Emirates, but there's nothing there. The distance isn't long enough. And then for islands, the separation, let's see, if the parent, there's a 350 rule. So for example, let's say the United States, and we have Hawaii or Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands. Those are all well over 350 kilometers away from mainland, and they are separated by water. So those would automatically be put on as a geographical entity. And there's also another rule where if you have, for example, the American Samoa. American Samoa is way over 350 kilometers, but American Samoa also is made up of an island called Swains Island. And that island happens to be just over 800 kilometers away from its parent, which is American Samoa. So that's another, that's two DXCC entities there by separation, the geographical separation. And then the third one there, let's see, separated by its parent with intervening land. I think we talked about that already. So go ahead and go on to the next screen, please. Special areas. There currently are 2 special areas which do count for DXCC. They are the United Nations and 4U1 UN and the ITU Geneva 4U1 ITU, which I will say right now, if you have never worked 4U1 ITU Geneva, you want to do that in the next week or so. They are on, they're having meetings over there, and representatives, amateur radio operators are over there as representatives for a meeting that's going on. And you have until June 3rd. After that, the meeting will be over, and that building they're meeting in currently that they have the station in is going to be demolished. They're going to take the stations down, and it could be not until 2027 or 2028 before they build the new building and put the station back on the air again. So that's one that you will want to definitely be looking for over the next week or so. I'm not sure. I think we can.
This is the one I changed on you. And in this section of the criteria, they also call special areas which can't be further divided into separate entities. For instance, Antarctica. Really, Antarctica is a special area in the world. There's a thing called the Antarctic Treaty, and the Antarctic Treaty says that multiple countries can put up stations in Antarctica, and even though they're divided up by different countries, it can only be one country. You can't divide it further.
Yeah,
there's also a special area. Go ahead.
That's for everything south of 60 degrees.
Right, everything south of 60 degrees is in that treaty. Yeah. And then the other one is Western Sahara, which is a special zone. You might want to comment on that, Bernie. Right?
That I don't know if that's totally right or if that was a grandfathered. It may be. I'd have to do a little bit of research on that one.
Well, the current rule, I just checked this tonight, and the current rule lists this, and it says, and I know this is true, that the actual political situation in Western Sahara is it's not quite clear who runs Western Sahara. So there's an issue between the Morocco government, which would make it part of Morocco and it wouldn't be part of a country then, but right now, there's an indigenous population there, and they have this entity called RASD. And so for the time being, until this is settled, the ARL desk has decided that Western Sahara is going to count as a country, even though if it belongs to Morocco, it wouldn't. And the very last thing you might want to comment on that.
Yeah, but as far as any others, I don't think they will be allowing any other ones. Scarborough Reef is definitely not in that group. It was something else. Yeah. Yeah.
So this was an issue here. Any entity that was on the list in 1998 is grandfathered.
Correct.
And
after the DXCC 2000 rules came into effect.
So the UN building, for instance, in New York City is not currently listed as a special area, but it was before. Scarborough Reef came on the list before, And they specifically said, and when they made the ITU a region, they would not have any more. So nobody's going to bring any buildings, any more buildings, or there are other United Nations buildings all around the world, but none of them count as separate countries.
And one of the reasons that they kept the two, the UN and the ITU, is the significance that they have on DXing. One, in recognition of the UN for, you know, countries and things like that. They wanted to give it some special effect because of the you know, the UN is in charge of a lot of new countries. And the same thing with the ITU. They're giving them some leeway here because they issue the call signs, and there were a lot of hams there. But as far as like the other buildings that belong to the UN in different countries, like the Vienna International Center, they will not be new ones. They will not.
There's several in Italy that
Yeah.
are separate.
There's one in Washington, the World Bank. Same
Yes,
thing.
it has a 4U prefix, but it's not a country. No. And then ineligible areas.
Yeah, that's things like monuments, embassies, neutral zones. At one point, neutral zones did count, but they no longer count after the DXCC 2000 rules came into effect. And then entities that are deleted, those are the ones that they no longer meet the criteria which got them on the list to begin with. So for example, let's just say the ITU issued a certain country a prefix, and they weren't a UN member and they didn't meet any of the other criteria, but they had a prefix. And then, you know, 3, 4, 5 years later, the ITU says, we kind of gave that prefix out in mistake. We're taking it back. Well, that would be an example of you had criteria, but now you don't have criteria. And unless you had some other way of getting on the list, you're going to be deleted. I believe there are 60 or 61 DXCC entities that have been deleted over the years from 1947 until, I guess the most recent one was, I'm trying to think what the most recent one was. I think it was one of the KH5 Kingman Reef. I think that was the most recent one.
So for instance, S0, Western Sahara, if Morocco eventually becomes the parent of that, then that would no longer be
correct.
Separate. That would go off the list, but it would count up into the point they took it off. And of course, there's always this entity down here on the lower right. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I thought that was further, but that's okay. So Scarborough Reef is really, I mean, at the time it met the DXCC criteria. It was a country. It took a long time to get it on the list, a lot of fighting and whatnot. But after that, when the DXAC and other DXers got involved, they really didn't like the idea of this being a country, and maybe rightfully so. So they came up with a new rule, but unfortunately that rule doesn't affect Scarborough Reef, but it means that no other countries like Scarborough Reef will come up. And that rule basically is that at high tide, the island must be at least 100 feet, or excuse me, 100 meters of it must be above the tide. So you have land that's more than 100 meters long. If not, it doesn't meet the criteria, and it would not be a new DXCC entity. And obviously, if they put that rule in before, Scarborough Reef would have never been added.
But it's there and it's going to stay.
For the time being, yes.
Okay, so the current list has got 340 entities now, up from the 231, which began in 1937. Here's a list here. If you want a list, the easiest thing to do is use your logging program, because all the logging programs have the lists, and they use an up-to-date list. The country.dat file that's maintained. Who maintains that again?
Alpha Delta One Charlie. He does a great job on doing the list of countries.
And it's kept up to date weekly, and it changes, because sometimes it's very hard to tell what a country is. It's really not always obvious. There are many prefixes, and not all of them are what you'd call the usual prefixes for amateur radio. But all radio stations in the world, as you probably well know, all transmitters have to have a call sign, and unless they're exempted by things like Part 15, and they are assigned those by the ITU. And a lot of them are assigned, but not generally used. For instance, I worked a station in the Philippines this morning, and the prefix is 4I. You might not run into that very often, but that is a prefix for the Philippines, although the quote standard prefix is DU. So it's not always obvious. Oh, I have it right down here, CTY.dat by ED1C, right. And also sometimes the prefix doesn't define the country. For instance, when the Navassa Island de-expedition occurred, their call sign was K1N. So one of the criteria was they needed an address, and there's no place they could have an address from Navassa Island. So they used K1N as the prefix. So that looks like it could be just a US station, but in this case, it was actually a separate country. So it's not always obvious just from the prefixes what the country is that you're working.
Yeah, so, let me just add on to that. The normal prefix for Navassa is Kilo Papa 1, and it could also be Whiskey Papa 1 and November Papa 1. And like Roll said, you have to have an address on the island in order to get an actual KP1 or WP1 or NP1 call sign. So you could either do your call sign stroke KP1, or in this instance where the de-expedition didn't want a real long call, they wanted a short call, they applied for one of the 1x1 calls, K1N for Navassa. Also on the call signs, you don't know exactly what they are in some instances. It's not always obvious. For example, the VK9 prefix, I think there's 5 DXCC entities that use that prefix. Norfolk, Willis, Mellish, Lord Howe, and I'm trying to think of the 5th one. Anyway, and the same thing is true for the Victor Papa 8 prefix. There's actually, as of not too long ago, there were 6 DXCC entities for the VP 8 prefix. And soon it'll be down a few more because they're going to come up with a new prefix for some of those islands. So anyway, you never know sometimes what you may be working, but usually almost always the CTY.dat file, which is done by AD1C, he updates it every week or two, and most logging programs, including contest logging programs, use that database to tell them where the country is. Go ahead, Roll.
So talking a little bit beyond DXCC, once you've worked a lot of countries and you still want things to chase, people start doing things like chasing countries by band, trying to work DXCC on 9 bands, for instance. Or they do it by mode, try to get 100 countries or count how many countries they have on various modes, single slide band, CW, RIDI, etc. And the DXCC desks recognizes a lot of these different divisions of DXCC and issues special endorsements and certificates. So that's an aspect of the hobby which is caught on quite a bit, since the 5-band DXCC was created many decades ago now. By the way, it's sort of a sidelight here. A totally new country, not one on a different band or a different mode, is called an ATNO, or an all-time new one. This is a country you have never worked before on any band or mode. And sometimes people misuse that term. Atno, it's not an Atno, it should have never worked ever for DXCC credit. There are also some special chases like the DXCC challenge, which Bernie is way up on the top of that list. And the idea there is to work as many band countries as you can. You don't count different modes, but you count all the bands from 160 through 6 meters, not including 60 meters. 60 meters doesn't count currently for any ARRL awards, worked all states or DXCC or any of those things. There's also the DX Marathon, which I like to chase. That's the idea there. It's kind of like the birders' big year. If you're familiar with birding, the birders have a North American big year where they try to see as many birds in North America as they can in the calendar year starting January 1st to December 31st, and they redo it every year, and there's a champion. And the DX Marathon is the same way, sponsored by CQ Magazine, and you work as many entities as you can in a year. It's the DXCC list plus the CQ Magazine list, which has these additional entities that count Bear Island, and which is in JW prefix. Then there's one of those ones you don't know if it's a separate one unless you know. Italian Africa is not separate even though it's in a different continent. That's true of Turkey. Turkey has 2 continents too. So you want a trivia question, what DXCC entities are on 2 continents? There are many, but those are 2. And then the Shetlands, the Scottish Shetlands, Sicily, and European Turkey versus Asia Turkey count separately, as well as the UN in Vienna. So and you also count zones for this one. So I've been doing that for a number of years now, and it's always fun to. This morning early, not long after they landed there, I worked with 3D2-R people, actually 3D2RRR, who unfortunately, in my opinion, have only been on FTA since they arrived there, as far as I know, but they'll be on other modes too. But anyway, I like chasing that. Islands on the Air is another award. You want to talk about that a little bit, Bernie?
Yeah, it's basically, there's approximately 1,200 islands throughout the world. It's run by the IOTA Ltd. There's a contest once a year run by the Radio Society of Great Britain. I think the highest ranking guy on there has got just over 1,100 islands, and he's only missed one, I think, that's ever been activated before. There's several that have not been activated. Very popular program, both in Japan and Europe, and it's starting to pick up here in the US also.
These are island groups sometimes
Right.
too, not just individual little spots of land.
Yes.
And of course, most of you are probably familiar with worked all zones. I got interested in how these 40 zones got picked because they're really strange kind of a division of the world. Here's a map showing the 40 zones. And what I read about this is that it's essentially there is no logical criterion which was set up to pick these various zones. I think some guy sat down at breakfast one morning and drew lines on a chart, kind of dividing the world up. It's interesting. The whole world is covered. We have one of the rarest zones in the world is right next door to us here. Zone 2 is extremely rare, and some of the others, of course, are extremely common, and many have huge populations. Some have very small populations. Zone 23 is in a very unpopulated part of the world. Plus, it's very far away. So some of these zones are more challenging than others. Any comments, Bernie?
Nope, I think you got it.
Okay, so let's have some tips for getting started. First of all, if you don't have DXCC, it's not that difficult an award to get, really. You don't need a big station. You don't need a lot of time. There are a lot of very populous countries that are close by, or north-south from us, where propagation is really, really easy, and even small QRP radios can get through. So we, Central America, South America, Europe, and North America, well over 100 countries just in those areas. And you don't need higher power, and you don't need big antennas, though obviously it doesn't hurt to have those things. And you don't need any special skills to work these common DX entities. One piece of advice I would give you is getting started is learn FT8, because there's huge amount of DX now on FT8 all the time, every day, virtually every band. And it's such a good mode as far as signal to noise ratio capability is concerned, that you can get through to these stations, even fairly rare ones, with a fairly minimal station. But I really suggest strongly that you don't stay on FT8. A lot of the fun is working single sideband, and I'm a special fan of CW, and RTTY is still a lot of fun. Bernie?
Yeah, I would say also get on for a contest. Even if you're, not going to submit your log, especially as we go further up in the sunspot cycle, you can get on 10 meters and 15 meters and 12 meters, although there's no contest on 12. But you can get away with a small antenna and still have a lot of fun and work a lot of DX. As Roll said, learn FT8, at least to the point where if an all-time new one comes on, you want to be able to at least work them. But again, as he said, graduate from FT8. Sideband can be a lot of fun. CW can be a lot of fun. CW has some real good advantages. You can be weaker than a sideband signal. You can hear better. You can operate in the middle of the night and not wake your family. There's all kinds of benefits to these other modes, but definitely use all the modes that you can and all the bands that you can to work DX.
I can admit to when a rare one is on, to K3RA, trying to keep the sound down. Got the doors all closed. Okay, so how do you work DX? This is essentially the question here. You'll know what a DX station is because you've got the list, or because you've got your logging program and you recognize the call signs, something strange, and it tells you, yeah. So you need to kind of know what's going on a little bit. The DX station may be making casual contacts, just talking to people, or he may be running. If he's running, all he wants you to do is give him a signal report and say thank you. And you don't want to. I mean, he probably won't be too offended if you say a few things about what your transmitter is and so forth. But you notice that most people are not doing that, and he would probably appreciate it, especially if he's a slightly rare one. He'll want to give out as many contacts as he can. However, if he's casual, if he's given his name and what kind of weather they have over there, he may want to exchange names and QTHs and so forth and have a little chat. And if he speaks English, and a lot of the people do speak very good English, warning, many of them sound like they do, but once you get beyond just the very basics of my name is and a few other things, you find they don't understand what you're saying. But if they speak English, you may want to have a long chat with them if it's clear they're, quote, casual. And another point is that when you're answering a DXCQ, you want to just sign your call sign only once or twice. You don't want to give his call sign from your call sign and all the stuff you learned about probably at the beginning of your ham career. You just want to sign your call sign. And also, call CQ, even if you don't have a powerful station. I remember very well, I mean, W3LPL is right close to me, not nearly as close as he is to Bernie. But I remember that I was on 12 meters one time, and I didn't know it, but Frank was on there too. Both of us tuning around. I called CQ, and some very rare DX came back to me. I forget what it was. And Frank said, it pays to call CQ every now and then, doesn't it? And it really does. We thought the band was dead until I called CQ. Nowadays, you got FT8 there. If you tune to the FT8 frequency and you see a lot of stuff coming through, you know the band is open. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Bernie, you want to?
Yeah, on the CQing DX, I don't know where this came from, but there are some old timers older than me that will tell you, oh, real DXers don't call CQ DX. Well, let me tell you, if that's true, I've broken the rule a lot, and I've worked a lot of good DX. I can remember operating on 20 meters and calling specifically for certain areas, CQDX Asia, when the band was open, and getting answered by Alpha Papa 2s and VU 2s from Pakistan and India. I can remember doing it on 10 meters at the height of the sunspot cycle when I was a well, I wasn't a novice then, a general on 10-meter phone, and just running Asia in the old days of the Soviet Union, just all across Asia. So don't hesitate to call when the band is open, and don't hesitate to call for a certain area. If you're not CQing, you're not getting answers.
I meant to send you some details because I was on 15 today calling CQ just like that this morning before lunchtime, and I worked 3 or 4 Japanese stations. I didn't see a single one spotted. I worked 2 stations in fairly rare Philippines. You don't hear that all the time. Quite a few stations in Indonesia, some Asiatic Russians. It was really interesting. I called CQ for several hours, and it was pretty much a European band until you called CQ. Sometimes stations will be taking a list. The idea here, I guess, is I've never been a big fan of this, but some stations overwhelmed by the pileups that people that are calling, and we'll talk more about pileups too, they won't come back to any specific person. They just take a list of people that are calling them, and after some amount of time, they'll say, okay, I got a list here. I'm going to work my way through the list. Everybody stand by. And then they will go through the list and call one station at a time that they wrote down. Lots of reasons why I think this is a terrible idea, but people do it. And so if you notice that's happening, you have to be careful that if you stumble across somebody who is working a list, that you don't call while he's working the list. And you can tell that because he doesn't say CQ or QRZ or anything. He just goes from one call sign to the other. Often they'll say the last 2 letters in your call sign. I guess that's okay. Some people point out that that's not really technically legal. Anyway, the main thing I think to learn about this is don't call if it is a list and you're not on it yet. And we were talking about sort of referring to DX nets. Thinking about them anyway when I was saying this list, because this is a situation where either a regular group of people get together, but not a group of people, usually a net control station who regularly with a couple friends maybe manages a frequency at the same time every day or at a certain schedule, and they will take quote DX check-ins and then offer that DX station for anybody who wants to call them. And that's when they'll take a list, and they'll ask for last 2 because they don't want you to they don't want to relay your call sign to the DX station by him hearing your call sign given by the net control. So I'm tempted usually to give my full call sign anyway, because I think you should not give your last 2 letters. You should sign your full call. Anyway, when your turn comes, you call the station you want and you sign your call once or twice and give a report. Don't call stations you can't hear. This is a crazy situation where often you hear the silly things where the net control station will say, go ahead, Radio America, K3RA America, you're 3x3, you're 3x3. The next station says, I didn't get that. Was it 4x5? Then the net control says, when he hears that you can't hear him because you don't come back, he says, No, that was wrong. Give it to him again. That was a little bit higher, a little bit high. Give it to him again. And then they keep doing this until the guy guesses what number they're thinking of. Very poor. Anyway, it's not quite as bad as it used to be, but it still happens. Any comments?
Nope, I think you nailed it, Brooke.
Here's some nets that are active. I'm not going to spend any time on this. Some of them are, there's some informal things where guys just get on at no regular schedule or semi-regular schedule and just have big stations, and they'll say they're with company, quote unquote, and 2 or 3 people work together, or they'll invite other people to join them. Let's talk a little bit about your station and the skills. I said you don't need big antennas and high power, but they help, of course. But you can do a lot with a small station if you're skilled, you're patient, and you have a lot of mode flexibility. Some stations are only on phone. Some stations are only on CW. Some stations are only on FT8. So if you really want to work a lot of countries, the more flexibility that you have, the better. Some may only show up on RTTY. And if you're not capable on RTTY, you might not get them. Learn how to use your radio. Learn how to operate split. If you have a dual receiver, which is a valuable tool for working DX, you can listen on your frequency and on the split frequency. We'll talk more about that. Learn how to use your filters. Have the best sized filters for various modes. You definitely want to have a choice of filters for sideband and CW and digital modes. Nowadays, most radios are really software-defined radios where you can dial the bandwidth. So this is a little bit less of an issue now. There's some special processing, noise reduction, and so forth that are useful. As I said, 2 VFOs and 2 receivers are really helpful on working split. Also, if you don't have your extra class license, you're handicapped, because a lot of CW and phone stations are operating on the extra parts of the 20 and 15 meter band and 40 meter band as well. So those are bands where you're going to be really hurting if you don't have an extra class license. And as we said, get a logging program to help you identify the countries and keep track of everybody that you work. Any comments?
Yeah, on the extra class, some of the DXpeditions that have US operators, they will listen up into the general phone band or CW band. But you know, that's only a certain small percentage of the DXpeditions that are out there. In other countries where these operators come from, some of the DX stations or the DXpeditioners where they come from, they don't have that restriction. So I would just highly recommend getting your extra class when you can, as soon as you can, and go from there. Like I said, most DXpeditions will listen up if they have some US guys on the team.
We talked about this a little bit, about contests being a great way to add to your total. One thing to remember is you don't have to, quote, enter the contest. There's no rule that says you have to send in a score or officially be in the contest. You can work one station if it's a station you need for a new country, and they will be delighted that you give them serial number 1 if it's a serial number contest, because that means you didn't work anybody else and they got points nobody else got. So don't hesitate to join the contest just to work a new country. Also, the contesters can hear better than most stations. I mean, the big contest stations excellent ears, as we say, and they're trying to work all the really weak stations, as Tim can tell you. That's why he wants to put up that extra Yagi over there so he can hear even better than he hears already, which is fantastically well. So a lot of really weak stations with poor antennas and low power are in their logs, and you can be one of them. And also they tend to put their logs onto Log of the World right away. So you can get confirmation that way. I'm not going to talk too much about Log of the World confirmations, but you should look into that, because that's pretty essential nowadays in getting your DXCC credit. And if you want to know what the rules are of the contest, you can just listen for a while. You probably figure out what the exchange is, whether it's your state or your or serial number or your zone or whatever it is, but you can look it up. The ARL has a contest update that's published every other Wednesday, and there's also this link here that you can get, or you can just look up, do a search for contest calendar on the internet, and you'll find several different.
To add to what Roll just said, you can even, once you've done a few contacts, you could go up the band, find a clear frequency, call CQ contest, if you've got an hour or so to get on, or you can just go up the band and call stations. If you want to get faster results, just probably best off not to follow the packet cluster. The other thing about contests is, especially during the just before the week of the CQ Worldwide, DX, Phone, and CW contests, those are the last full weekends of October and November. Get on the week before, starting Monday before the contest, many of the stations will be getting set up. They want to test out their antennas. They'll try some of the work bands or the low bands. Get on before and work some of these DX stations before the big event.
So how do you find a DX? Well, first three rules of DXing are listen, listen, listen. Although we did say call CQ too, but the more you listen, it's not only that you'll hear rare DX, but you'll learn when the bands are open and to what parts of the world they're open. Just as a general guide, the higher frequency bands are generally daytime bands. Although right now, 15 and 20 are open almost around the clock. So this morning when I was working those stations in Asia, it was midnight their time, and they were working the States on 15 meters. So the bands are open around the clock now because the sunspots are really roaring and doing great things for us. Sunrise and sunset are very special times for working DX. You hear stuff at those times, sometimes that you don't hear any other time. You need to hear W3LPL's propagation talk to learn all you're going to learn about this. It's a lifelong thing to learning the propagation. It's what makes it a lot of fun. Propagation changes from hour to hour, and from day to day, and from month to month. And the sun's activity, sunspot activity and storm activity affects things called the solar flux and the K index. You need to learn about those and what they mean. These are very available numbers. In fact, most log programs will download them automatically from the internet, but there's many other ways to get them. Lots of tools to help you learn the bands. That's what I think is most of the fun, is hearing stuff that you never heard coming through that. I was just, last night I was up late, and I was running stations on 20 meters at 2 o'clock in the morning in Europe, because I haven't been able to do that in a long time, because it's been a daytime band only. So it's just fun because it was different. Any comments on propagation?
The only thing I would mention is in the last couple of days, guys have been on 15 and 17 meters between 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and 10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, which is 00 to 0200 Zulu, and working all kinds of stuff into Asia. So get on the higher bands.
We can't really do justice to propagation here in a chart here. This is just some comments. We're in still the early part of cycle 25, and this makes me feel good every time I see it. I've been looking for an update that goes a little bit later. I have seen one that now goes to end of April. I don't have it plotted here, but here's the official forecast, and here's where we are. So, in fact, this is actually low. It's actually been up. I think the high has been 183 or something like that, Bernie.
Yep.
So it's up here someplace, just for a couple days. So, there have been various predictions. This was the consensus prediction, and a group met and came up with this of all the different physicists that were working on this problem. Looks like the one guy who's been Scotty, who's been predicting this might be a really big cycle, looking more right all the time. Of course, we all have our fingers crossed. 20 meters is still, if you only have one band, 20 meters would be it. From sunrise to well past sunset, right now it's around the clock. 18 meters is a great band. It's open almost as much as 20. It was open late last night and up till midnight. It was still open, and probably later. 15 meters is hot now. 2 years ago, you very rarely worked much on 15. And 12 and 10 meters, there's lots of DX on 12 and 10 meters. People in the southern part of the United States are still working long path on 10 meters to Yankee Bravo and Bravo Yankee and some other stations. That would be Indonesia and China. You might want to comment on that, Bernie.
Yeah, that's mostly the guys in the South, like in Florida and Alabama and whatnot at this point.
30 meters is great for a beginner. It's only CW and FT8, but it's usually open to some DX, and you aren't competing with kilowatts and huge antennas on 30. Dipole and 100 watts is very, very competitive on 30 meters, and lots of rare stuff shows up there from time to time. 40 meters is pretty much a nighttime band in the summertime. In the wintertime, it can be open until way after sunrise and open up again way before sunset, almost around the clock. The further north you are, the more likely it is to be open around the clock. 80 and 160, they're maybe not for beginners, but they sure are a lot of fun to work DX on 80 and 160. Noisy in the summertime, pretty much wintertime bands, probably suffering a little bit now as the sunspots go up.
Yeah, Ro, one thing you neglected to mention was technicians. And I know, I suspect we probably have a couple of technicians on here. You can work DX on 10 meters if you've got like a vertical or a tri-bander or something like that. On sideband, you've got 200 kilohertz of the band from 28,300 to 500, and that's usually where the rarer DX is. You can also do the digital modes between 28 and 28.3. So there's all kinds of opportunities. I think the limit there, though, is power, but on 10 meters, you don't need a lot of power.
And it's a small antenna, just a little bit bigger than that 6-meter dipole that for many years, the only antennas I had were dipoles after I moved to this QTH, and I figured a way around the limitations of the historic district. So as I was talking about earlier, I just had a multi-wire dipole for 10, 12, and 6. And with that dipole, I worked a lot of DX, because when the band's open, you don't need a big station. You should learn the Great Circle. If you don't know about the Great Circle path, you need to be familiar with it, because you're going to come in with some surprises. Here's a map on the right of a great circle. It's called an equidistant azimuthal projection. It means that the azimuths are all correct to these countries, and the distances measured from the center to wherever you're interested are accurate distances. It's a highly distorted map. It's like taking a globe and drilling a hole in the antipodal side of the exact opposite side, which is off the coast of Perth, Australia, and then stretching the world out into a flat disk from that hole. And so if you notice here, you may be surprised that most of South America is not south, but southeast of us. And Africa is east of us, not southeast of us. And Europe is northeast of us, not east of us. And Japan is to the northwest. So you need to know these things. And you can get a map online. You can download maps centered on your location. And logging programs generally have the capability of displaying this map. You want to talk to this a little bit, Bernie?
Sure. So we're going to talk about spotting, DX spots. And that's like basically someone has found a rare station or a semi-rare station, and they've worked it for, you always want to make sure you work the station first before you spot the station. Unless you can't hear, or you could barely hear them and you can't get through. But basically, there's different ways of spotting. The most common one is Telnet, which is usually through your logging program. You connect to one of the Telnet clusters like VE7CC, W3LPL, or a whole host of other Telnet clusters. And some of this information can be found for later use, where you can go back and search for things such as on the DX Summit or DX Watch. You can put in the information. Let's say you're looking for, you've never worked Mongolia. So you go to DX Summit and you go up in the top right-hand section of the page, and you put in where it says the search bar, you put in JT. You want to see all the stations that have been put out in the DX Summit. And then you hit the enter button, and it'll list out all the Mongolian stations that have been listed the last 50 spots or so. And you can manipulate the data for bands and other things. But that's where the information is stored. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it, unless you've got something else, Bro.
Make sure you like the right station.
Yeah, that's for sure. You know, sometimes you'll get a spot and it'll say 28500. It's BY5AA, and actually someone miscopied it, and it's 6Y5AA. So always verify that that the station you're going to get ready to call is the one that was listed. Make sure you get the call right before you log it.
I know we talked a little bit about QSL cards. If you really are interested in getting the awards and not just counting for yourself, for many years I chased the DX. For most of my career, I chased DX without applying for it. I got my first DX award about 5 years ago, after a career of actually counting them. So you don't need to chase these awards. Nobody cares but you, right? So it depends, but you know, you may want the actual proof. So you can get the paper QSLs. If you're working DX, whether you're interested or not, you should keep an SASE on file with the ARL Bureau and get the cards that are being sent to you via the bureaus that gather cards together for a country and mail them to another country, and then they disperse them. Now, here's information on that incoming QSL service here. And then print some QSL cards, get some printed, and answer these cards. And you can do that on the outgoing service if you're a member of the ARRL. The cheapest way to do it by sure is to send it out by the ARRL outgoing service. Again, you have to be an ARRL member to do that. The most popular way nowadays is undoubtedly the logbook of the world. Not every station does this, but eventually all of the DXpeditions do it. Sometimes they hold off for a while to get some of their expenses covered for very very costly DXpeditions. If you want information on the logbook of the world, it's here. But I'm sure you know what it is. It's a cross-reference by computer, and ARL and CQ Magazine awards are confirmed via logbook of the world. Many rare stations have a QSL manager, a station that handles the card for them. There's a list at this site that we'll make this link. All these links available to you. We'll give a copy of this presentation. Many of them are U.S. stations, so they save a lot of money. They save a lot of money in mailing and self-addressed stamped envelopes and all that stuff if you're doing it inside the United States. I didn't talk about the club log. I can't think of the name of it now. The confirmation system. Yeah, talk about that a little bit.
There's also a lot of the DXpeditions and many DXers and even just regular operators, they just put their logs on club log, and it's a whole system of all kinds of data that's put in there. You upload your log, and you can check to see if you've worked, if you're in the log for a lot of these DXpeditions. Let's say like the current one, like Roll just worked the 3D2RRR. If he uploads his log into club log, he can then look and see if the 3D2RR DXpedition has uploaded their log, match it, and then there's a place on there that if the DXpedition has it set up correctly, you can just click on the button for an online QSL reply system, OQRS, and you can do all of your QSLing for that station right online. Just click the button. They'll usually ask for $2 or $3 to get a direct card. It's connected to PayPal. It uploads the financial information to their account, and then they have the date and time and your call sign and all the information they need for the QSL card. And they have 6 months in order to answer a QSL card. And if they don't answer it within the 6 months, you can file a claim. It doesn't happen very often, but to get your money back. It's only $2 or $3, but still. But this way, you don't have to manually write down the address of the station overseas and run the possibility of writing the wrong PO box or whatever. You don't have to put the $1 or $2 or $3 in the envelope and risk a mailman or some other individual taking your money out of the envelope that's going to the DX station. And it gets there instantly. I mean, as soon as you hit the OQRS button, the information is all loaded. He's got everything he needs to send you a QSL card back. Now, just because he's got it all that quick doesn't mean he's going to reply as quickly, because he has to, on a DXpedition, get the QSL cards printed, then print out all the labels, then put them on the QSL cards once he gets them, then put them in the envelope. So it's a process, but it definitely saves money and time using Club Log's OQRS. And I believe Roll has one of his guys that does a presentation on Club Log, but there's a whole lot of information stored in that, and that's for another day for another presentation. Go ahead, Roll.
You don't have to upload your log. You can still do a confirmation without uploading your log, although many people do, but you don't have to.
You can manually put the information in for one QSO or whatever.
So now let's talk about, for a little more advanced people, and we're not worried. We're not just working the first 100 countries. We're down to the last ones. We've worked many. When you're over 200 countries, they start to get hard. Over 250 countries, they get really hard. And over 300 countries, it's going to take years probably to do it, because all these countries are not active. So what makes a rare country? Well, it may have a reasonable number of hams, but it's just difficult to work. It's from where you are. For instance, Mongolia isn't all that easy. Although with the sunspots the way they are, there's no place in the world that's that hard to get to. During the sunspot minimum, this is really much more of a challenge. But it may be just where they are. So the more DX effective your station is, the more likely you're to hear. By the way, hearing is very important. Keep that, work with your local utility company to get the power line noise down and other sources of noise. Some countries only represented by a couple of stations, even though they may be fairly populated, or they may only operate on a couple of bands or modes. So you have to be able to get to their band and mode. Some are only on the air at pretty unpredictable times. The best example I can think of is Mount Athos, which is a separate country. It's an enclave. It's part of Greece, except it's a separate enclave. And the monk that's there, or some of his friends, only get on rarely, and it's not too predictable. But usually they're on several times a year. Others are only on the air when, quote, the expedition goes there. So you need to know about the DXpeditions that are coming up. One way to do that is to subscribe to Bernie's emailings, but we'll talk about more there. And when that happens, when a rare one shows up, there are big pileups of people calling. So maybe you want to talk about this list. I'm sure people will be interested in hearing some stories here, Bernie.
Okay, yeah, this is the most wanted list, which comes from the data that is inputted into Club Log. So the number one, the rarest country at this point is P5, which is North Korea. There's only been 4 operations from there that have been credited by the DXCC. Approximately 12,000 unique QSOs have happened. There's been 16,000 contacts in total that have been made. Some guys have made a few more than one contact. But one of them that's coming up soon, as you can see from this list, is Bouvet, 3Y. And that one might happen by one group sometime between now and December. But we know for sure a second group is going, and they are going to depart somewhere in South America. They are leaving on January 6th, and it'll take them about 9 days, 10 days to get to Bouvet from South America. And they're going to be the 3Y0J DXpedition. And that is the number 2 most wanted. And if you can, you're going to want to get on and work these guys. And we should have a pretty good shot at it. It's basically like working due south. So we're going to have propagation quite often to Bouvet. Another one that's coming up on this list is FT5W, Crozet. There's a single operator going in, I believe, November of this year. He's going to be there for 3 months. I think he'll get on the air by around December, and he'll be leaving in March of 2023. It's a French operator. He's going specifically to operate amateur radio, so we have a good shot at that one. The rest of them, at least in the top 10, I don't see any. Well, Kerguelen, there's somebody there. He just hasn't gotten on the air yet. He's a new ham, and he needs a lot of encouragement, I think. But this just gives you an idea of the rarest ones.
Go ahead.
So how do we know when these rare ones are on? Well, the best way is to subscribe to a DX newsletter, such as the Daily DX or the Weekly DX. And there's a link there that if you can try it for free for 2 weeks. And if you like it, you can subscribe. If not, that's fine too. There's a number of free services out there that are weekly newsletters. The DX World has one that comes out, I think, on Thursdays. The American Radio Relay League has their DX bulletin that comes out on Friday. OPDX from the Northern Ohio DX Association comes out on usually on Saturday or Sunday. And then the 425 DX News comes out of Italy, and that one comes out on Friday late mornings. Then there's also a number of DX websites. One of them is DX World.
So you need to know when the bands are open to the ones you need. It used to be we pretty much had to rely on predictions. I can remember back in the 60s and 70s getting CQ magazine and looking at the predictions that were made for all the bands. There was a little table there. You can imagine how inaccurate that was when it was put to press 2 months before you got the actual document. The special program was developed for the Voice of America called VOACAP, and it's kind of the workhorse program for propagation modeling. And you can do it online with this link, and you can actually go to the DX site, excuse me, the VOACAP site, and get predictions for propagation between your area and any specific area you're interested in or by hour, or what the propagation is going to look like. Again, these are all based on the sun spot numbers and the time of year, which it knows the time of year and the sunspot numbers when you're online, and takes care of that for you. There's also a program called HamCap, which is displayed on the right, which interfaces with the VOACAP engine and gives you various capabilities like this plot of that where the colors show what the signal strength is at a given time for a given frequency. and there's many different capabilities there. The prop wheel is particularly useful. This is the online VOA cap, and the time in Zulu is around the outside edge, and then the band circles go in toward the center from 80 to 10. And so if you're whatever country this was, some country in the Far East there, in the mid East, was the best band was clearly 17 meters during this time. If you're interested in getting them on 20, this would have been the time, the red here. But those are predictions. Better to know, not predictions, but what is really going on. And thanks to FT8, we have many hundreds of reports coming in constantly to a website called PSK Reporter. And it's sort of misleading because it's mostly FT8 spots, although it does take other spots. But the FT8 spots are in the many billions by now that have come in, and they're up to date. They're as I said, 600 or 700 spots a second coming through, not per minute, per second, and they're just roaring through. And so you can get a plot like this. This is the last 15 minutes to and from FM19. So that's my grid. So this is what at some time 15 meters looked like from FM19. So I didn't have to guess what the propagation was going to be like. I could actually see it. Here's the link to PSK Reporter. There's also some beacons that are in place on these frequencies that transmit alternately around the world. They're put in place by the Northern California DX Foundation. There's a link here to them. They send in Morse code at multiple power levels, and they're useful, but they're pretty much bypassed by the PSK reporter system. There's also the reverse beacon network. This is a network of software-defined radios around the world. You just sign your call sign and say test or CQ and your call sign, and you'll get a report of what stations are actually hearing you at any given time. You can get history data on this too. This also provides a map, much like PSK Reporter does. And then if you're really serious, you can subscribe to Ham Alert, and you put in the countries that you need, and it will email or notify you by text message or several other different ways when that country shows up, and give you an alert. And you can filter it by many different ways to find just the stuff that you're interested in. And here's a link to that. I'm moving pretty fast because we're running out of time here. Why don't you talk to the expeditions a little bit, Bernie?
Okay, well, there's all kinds of the expeditions. You can have somebody that's just going to the Caribbean, and they're going to get on the air when their wife says they can get on the air or something like that. That's more like a holiday style operation. You've got contest de-expeditions where somebody's going to, let's say, J6 to St. Lucia just for the contest to operate. Then you've got some guys, you can have one guy that's going from island to island, and it's just a single operator de-expedition where there's just going to be one radio, or maybe if he's operating FT8, he might have two radios. And then you can go all the way up to the point of a multi-operator, multi-band de-expedition, full-blown de-expedition. And usually these guys, when they go places, they usually announce it in the various DX publications.
So when these guys show up, the pileups can be incredible. Why don't you continue, Bernie?
Yeah, this is just a band scope picture, basically, of a de-expedition where they're transmitting on where the big arrow is, and they're listening up the band. And I think this is on CW. Yeah, this is on 40 meters CW, and you can see all these stations. There's probably at least 20 or 30 stations in there. There may be more. But this kind of gives you an idea of where everybody's calling. And sometimes if you've got a like a P3 or something like that, you can look and see where the DX station is actually listening and who the station that he's working, if you watch the band scope. The other thing you can do is to listen in your in a separate receiver and move your transmit VFO and listen to find out where the DX station is.
Yes, and they'll usually tell you, although not always,
Yep.
where they're listening. And sometimes that's only approximate.
Yeah, typically on CW, they'll listen up 1 kilohertz. If it's a really big pileup, they'll say just up. That's not really a good. It's better if they say up 1 to 5 or up 10 or something like that, and that usually means anywhere from 1 to 10 up if it's on CW. And on sideband, it's a whole lot easier to say. Most of them will say the starting point is typically going to be up 5. You don't want to say up 1 because you'll trash your own signal with the pileup. You always want to on phone operate split at least 5 kilohertz up or down. And then sometimes the DXpeditions, when it's a huge pileup, they may say, I'm listening 5 to 20 kilohertz up. And if you listen real carefully, some of the better operators will say something like 215 is open. And what they mean is you should call them on 14215 because no one's there and it's very quiet there. That happens sometimes with some of the better operators.
So some hints about pileups. I mean, this picture here is kind of what it feels like to be in a pileup sometimes. You may take hours to get through, especially if you don't have a really big station. But even if you do have a big station, trying to get through, I mean, their stations really have trouble copying with the hundreds of people that are calling. That's why they try to spread people out. Listen to the instructions the station is giving. You may say Europe only. It may be frustrating, but don't call if you're not in Europe. He's not going to come back to you. I can guarantee you that. You can call forever. He's not going to come back because once he does, his whole control of the pileup just disappears. Only answer when you're reasonably sure he's calling you. I mean, don't call on top of other people. And sign your full call and only your call. And timing is important. And listening so that you aren't calling when he's talking. Obviously, he can't hear you when he's talking, and you got to wait till he's listening. And so if you hear your partial part of your call, make sure it's really you. You know, if he comes back to a Whiskey 3 America Japan, that's not me just because I happen to have a 3 and an A in my call, right? But if he comes back to K3 Kilo 3 Romeo Delta, oh, that possibly is me, and I should try signing my call once or twice and see if he says again, please, again, then maybe that is me.
Yeah, and just to add to that, let's say that the station does say K3RD, and Roll should be going, and he's like, well, this is probably me. K3 Radio Alpha, K3 Roger America, and let it go. Don't give a signal report. Make sure the DX station gets your call. Then once he says, oh yeah, K3RA, you're 5 and 9. Once he does that, whether it's on phone or CW, only give the signal report. Do not give your call sign again. If you give your call sign again, the DX station is going to go, maybe I didn't get his call right. Maybe he's not K3RA, he's K3RJ. So always give your call only when you're not sure, and never give your call sign once you are sure.
Use standard phonetics. Learn Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, of course. And then actually, they're not always the best phonetics. More syllables is better. And because like Alpha and Bravo, Delta, they can sound a lot alike. Delta and Alpha, especially. And so the ones I have listed here that are countries are commonly used. Don't use clever ones, but this is a good list. America, Boston, Canada, Denmark, or some close thing to that. And we talked about don't answer if it doesn't match. Listen to the pileup. Can you tell how the person's tuning? Is he tuning up the band? Is he tuning down the band? Is he skipping around randomly? Is he working people on the edges sometimes? All that will help you. If you have a big signal, you may want to zero beat, quote unquote, the last station that he worked if you can find them using your band scope or pan adapter and a second receiver. On the other hand, if you have a fairly modest station, you probably are not going to work them that way because the strong stations will cover you up. Tail ending is, I'm going to skip this QRX5 thing, it's kind of a remote thing. The tail ending is signing your call as the other station he's working is finishing. It can work, but it's often annoying to the DX station and he may actually avoid you, so be careful doing that. We talked about don't repeat your call sign if he has it correct, because it just makes him think that maybe he had it wrong. Don't call if you can't hear the station. That's like rule number 1. We talked about online logs that you can go online, so we don't have to talk about this. Here's just an example of what you might see. They don't give you the frequency, exact frequency, and they don't give you the time and the date because they don't want you to be, quote, fishing for contacts here, which may be a busted call that just happens to match your call. If you don't, all they do is tell you your call sign is in his log for these bands in those modes. So we ran over a bit. This is maybe the most important part. Any questions for, especially for Bernie?
That you guys did great. Really, really did great. And you can go ahead and stop the share roll so we can get everybody back up on the screen. And
got any questions about upcoming DXpeditions or countries that you need and where to get them? Bernie, there's nobody who knows more.
There is nobody. There's nobody that knows more than Bernie does. And Bernie and Roll, thanks so much for being here tonight. Questions for Roll and Bernie? All right, I'm going to kick it off. This Bear Island thing, it's the first time I've heard that Bear Island is part of the WAE. And Bernie, have there ever been operation? What's the deal on Bear Island?
Yeah, there has. Usually it's in the summertime, but it's one of the Svalbard Islands. There's actually one other one, but it's far enough away and it's on the WAE list, and that's why it's on there. But as far as like in the CQ Worldwide contest,
right.
I don't. I don't think it's been on, Tim, in any of the contests in the last decade or two. I really don't. But it has been on in the last decade or two, but just not in the contest.
Right.
I've worked it in the last 10 years for the marathon. I probably worked it half the years. There's one guy used to go there quite regularly. I can't remember, LB something, the Lima Bravo call. So I can't tell you either, Tim, whether it's just turned out that they just never have been on during the CQ. I've never worked them in the CQ contest for credit. And you can't tell the prefix is JW, but CTY.dat knows.
Yeah, it knows.
Right.
Because Jim does a great job of doing it. And it's one of these places where I think they just go in the summertime.
Yeah, because it's not very fun to be there when it's really cold.
No, when it's frozen.
And I think you guys alluded to this, but 4U1 VIC is like 4U1 ITU, but it doesn't have all, it's a WAE, right?
It's a WAE country, yes.
Okay.
4U1A, sometimes 4U2.
Yeah, sometimes they sign 4U1A, but it's the VIC, the Vienna International Center.
Okay. Bernie or Roll, could you just spend, a minute talking about the fascination with Mount Athos and Monk Apollo and the new monk and the old monk and all the monks?
Sure. I actually had lunch 3 years ago with the new monk. Monk Apollo was the original one. It's been on probably for 20 or 20 some years. And he passed away of cancer about 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And at the time, are we still on record? Yeah.
Here, I'll shut
I
this
have to
off.
be really careful. At the time, monkeypox